Well, we've hit that time of the year where I am just about on overload. School starts, and you remember that there's a routine and that it's hard to keep it up. You're packing lunches, you're trying to keep track of homework and tired people and everybody having to be on a schedule again. Activities begin to start up, both at work and at home and after school. And little by little, things sort of incrementally build up until you're just barely making it. Maybe you've had that experience either with the beginning of the school year or with life, right? It happens easily, so easily. Things start to pile up and the tasks start to weigh on you. And for me, when that happens, I get blinders, and I get focused on what's happening in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to deal with that. Don't talk to me about tomorrow. I don't know about next week. I got this thing. I'm doing this thing. And my poor kids know that if you were to ask me in the car after school on the way to the first thing, what's for dinner? The answer is, am I standing in front of an open fridge? Because if I'm not, I probably don't know. And I'm not thinking about that yet. We have 4 other things to get through before we get to dinner. Right now, we are late for blah, blah, blah. And after that, we need to go to this thing. And then we need to stop and get milk. And we've got overdue library books. Dinner is on the schedule, but we're not there yet. I am in the zone on trying to find the best route to avoid the train and be on time to the next thing. You get the blinders on, right, when things start to weigh on you. And the other thing that happens as things tend to pile on and get overwhelming is I have an instinctive urge to keep it simple. So in staff meetings and at church council, I'm known as the no chicken lady. When we are having a discussion about a potluck and suddenly we're worried about ordering chicken and who's going to pick it up, I say, no chicken. It's a potluck. Keep it simple. My habit when expectations start to blossom is, no, let's keep them low. Let's keep our standards low. When I keep my standards low, I am pleasantly surprised all of the time, as opposed to kind of disappointed, right? So these are the attitudes that I kind of wander through life with, and there are lots of different attitudes, and if yours is that you have dinner planned a week in advance, bless you, that's great. We need all of these sorts of people in life. But as I'm reading scripture today, and as I'm listening to this story of these people's encounter with Jesus, I'm hearing an invitation to operate a little differently, at least in our lives of faith. So I don't know, no one does, what the explanation is for Jesus' unbelievable rudeness. There's no mince in words. This is more insulting in her culture than in ours. And it's already insulting in ours, but it's much more insulting in that culture. And Jesus pushes this woman off rudely. And I don't know, but to me it feels like the question, what's for dinner? And I'm trying to do thing number 1. I don't know, but I feel like we see Jesus being very human. He's been doing the thing. He's been doing the next thing. It's really hard to get through to these people. And he just keeps trying, and he'd like to have 5 minutes to collect his thoughts before he goes to the next thing. And here is someone showing up, asking about step 27. When are you going to get to the Gentiles, Jesus? And he's, I'm doing this thing here. But here's the thing. Jesus, even with that, then shows this remarkable openness. Because this woman comes to Jesus, and she is all wrong. She's entered a house that is not hers without invitation, so that's just rude. She's a woman who has chosen to speak to a man in public and to challenge him. That is not okay in that culture at all. She is a Gentile. She shouldn't be speaking to a Jew. She should not be entering the home of a Jew, which is presumably where Jesus was staying. And she has this child who is very, very ill, this child with whom something is very wrong. And in our culture, we have a hard time separating out when fortune is bad for someone, when bad things happen, We want to blame the victim so often. It's just human nature. And even more so in the culture that she lives in. She's associated with something going very wrong, so she's questionable. And yet she comes to Jesus. And Jesus' first reaction is, this is out of order. I'm still trying to work on the children that God sent me to, that I can't get through to. But she's heard what Jesus has been saying. She's heard what Jesus has been doing. Just last week in the story before this, Jesus talks to God's people and says, look, the rules you think it's all about washing your hands and who's in and who's out, that is not about God's kingdom. God's kingdom is very different than that. And it doesn't have a lot to do with our glorifying of rules. It's much bigger. It's much wider. And this woman's heard that, and she comes to Jesus, and she says, I heard what you said. I heard about it. It's going everywhere, and I have this need, and you said God's kingdom is big. And my daughter, is it that big? And as much as it's inappropriate for her to come to him, as much as it's shameful for this interaction to be taking place in a culture where shame and honor are everything, Jesus publicly concedes the argument. Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. He's willing to publicly lose the argument in places where a war of words is an honor contest. He's willing to publicly lose the argument and to say, oh yeah, God's kingdom is that big. It is. I've certainly had times where someone has come to me and said, but you said, and I say, oh yeah, I did. I sure did. Yep, we're going to do this now, aren't we? And so Jesus says, yeah, we're going to do this now. And so he has this openness to God's kingdom. And it shouldn't surprise us, right? It shouldn't surprise us that Jesus is open, because again and again, he runs into the barriers that his culture provides, the barriers that people trying to be deeply faithful but getting it wrong provide. And again, he says, wow, God's kingdom is bigger. And again today, God's kingdom is bigger. And he's willing to be publicly shamed in order to make that kingdom visible. And of course, we know then that he turns, right? So he returns from Tyre and he goes over to the Decapolis, which is it's just not an okay place, right? The Decapolis is this place that is largely populated by Gentiles. It's not ruled by the Herods. It's sort of outside the boundaries. It's sort of technically used to kind of be part of this thing, but it's not the heartland, right? It's over there where things are questionable and God's people are living mixed up with a bunch of other people, and they're not following the rules quite the way we think they should, the way grandma does back in the homeland. And Jesus goes there deliberately after meeting this woman. Oh, yes, it's bigger. And he meets this man and changes his life as well. And from there, he does turn and he points himself to Jerusalem. And from the whole rest of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is marching to Jerusalem and trying to help his disciples understand it's bigger, it's bigger, it's bigger. It's cross big, right? And so Jesus, we shouldn't be surprised he's willing to be publicly shamed by this woman when he is willing to be publicly shamed on a cross, to bear that mark of humiliation by the empire, to say this is a nobody and we want everyone to watch him suffer so that y'all will learn a lesson. And Jesus says, oh yeah, that's part of the plan. That's part of what it means that there will be no place that is beyond the power of God's love. I'm going to go there. Right? So Jesus has this openness to God's kingdom. And that's an invitation for us as that woman kind of knocks his temporary blinders off, that ours might get knocked off too. And that we might not only just see that openness is what brings us in, but that might be coming into our world as well. That someone might walk in our door uninvited and blow off our blinders and our vision of what the kingdom might be. And then the other, I think, invitation is here in this mother who is not going to quit. right? She is not keeping it simple. She's not setting a low bar. She is not willing to sort of temper her expectations and not risk disappointment. She is putting it all out there. She's breaking every rule she can think of because she has seen something in Jesus. She's seen an abundance in Jesus. Something big in what he is up to. High hopes, a high bar, and she is going to go all in. Faith, like she has, it doesn't seem to be about the right information, doesn't seem to be about the right protocol. Certainly, she's not paying attention to any of that. She is desperately clinging to Jesus. She is expecting from him healing and restoration and salvation because she's seen it at work, and she's not going to settle. She's not going to hold back. Wow. That's a whole different approach, isn't it? And it's one that I am always hesitant about because I like to keep it safe and simple. But there's this invitation to be something utterly different in response to who Jesus shows himself to be. And so as we go out into the lives that God has given us this week, the ones that might be overwhelming us, the ones that walk into our doors with uninvited boundary crossing, those things that keep us up at night, the invitation is to have that kind of a desperate trust in Jesus. Not one always that is settled. It's not as if our hearts are always comfortable, but to know that he's the one that blows open the doors and to cling to him. Thanks be to God.